Hey guys, welcome to Cru. Whether you're joining us in person or online, we're glad to have you.
My name is Lydia, and I am a senior majoring in business administration and marketing.
And I'm Sean, a senior studying paper science and chemical engineering.
We would love to tell you a little bit more about Cru. We are a Christian organization on campus, and we are passionate about connecting people with Jesus and others.
Tonight you guys are going to hear a story from our friend Kaylee, a talk from a Cru staff member, and then we'll break out into discussion groups.
And I don't know if you guys noticed, but we're rocking some pretty cool flannels this week, and that's because next week we're going to have our first themed Cru where we all want you guys to break out your cool flannels for the cool weather. On to our announcements. This Saturday the 12th, ladies, where you at? We have Mug and Muffin. I am so excited. We will be meeting outside the DUC at 8:50, and we will drive you guys over. Or you can meet us there at 1574 Church Street. We're meeting from 9 to 10 in the morning.
So to stay updated with Cru, you guys can go to our website, which is UWSPCru.org, or you can go to our social media, follow us at UWSP Cru on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and YouTube.
Next, we have Bible studies. We have both men's and women's Bible studies, both virtually and in person. The best way to find out this info about where they meet, how they meet, when they meet, is all on our website, once again, UWSPCru.org. We also have different movements such as Impact, Destino, and EPIC, which all work with people of color, Latin Americans, African Americans, and Asian Americans.
You guys can also join our AIA, Athletes in Action movement, which is for D3 athletes. They meet at 8 p.m. in the Encore on Mondays.
And finally, next Cru is next week, Thursday. Same place, same time, only rockin' flannels. We would love to see you both in person and online, whatever works best. But until then, we're going to transition to our story now from Kaylee and her walk with the Lord.
Hello, my name is Kaylee Yant, and I'm a senior studying communicative sciences and disorders here at UW Stevens Point. I grew up in a Christian household, and my father valued a Christian education, so I went to a private parochial school, kindergarten through 8th grade. We'd go to church every Sunday because church attendance was taken every Monday, and if you missed more than 2 Sundays in a row, you had a meeting with the principal to make sure everything was okay at home. We studied the Bible and had memory work almost every day, making religion nothing more than another subject in school. After I was confirmed in 8th grade, I made the big switch to public school, where religion was no longer a subject in school, and I felt free. Free from going to church, free from studying the Bible, and free from others telling me how to feel about God. I found my identity in my social life, having a lot of friends and going to parties. It wasn't long before I fell into sexual sin, and I was the farthest from God that I had ever been. My relationships with my family members suffered because I was too focused on how my peers saw me. I was so excited to move away from my family and start my life on my own at Stevens Point. I again felt freedom. Freedom from my parents and their rules. I again found my identity in my social life, joining a sorority to make friends and putting school on the back burner because I never had to try to succeed in high school. It wasn't long before I learned that college is not the same as high school, and I was lost. My grades were suffering, and my friendships were falling apart, and I didn't know where to turn. No longer feeling free, but instead looking for guidance. One of my sorority sisters led a Bible study and invited me to check it out, and I selfishly said yes. I craved a better image, and I knew my Christian school upbringing would give me a leg up in answering Bible study discussion questions. After going to a few studies, I learned that there is way more to being a Christian than just how well you know the Bible. My eyes were open to having a relationship with God, and that it was a two-way street. God was there for me during my hardest times, but I didn't let him in. I felt ashamed for turning away from God and not bringing my worries to him when I needed him the most. I was scared to accept Christ into my life because of how far I had turned from him. It took multiple weeks of tears, prayers, and my friends straight up asking me why not for me to realize I needed to make a change. I broke up with my boyfriend, quit my job, and surrendered my life to Christ, and I finally felt actual freedom. Freedom from sin and to find my identity in him. I no longer find my identity in my social life, but in what God sees in me. I know that God sees me not for my sin, but as his child, and that will never change. I feel freedom from my past self. I have repented, and I am saved. My sin doesn't hold me back or define who I am. I'm more than the sins I have committed, and I am a new person who has been washed clean by the Holy Spirit. I am no longer scared to go out of my comfort zone because I know that even if I do fail, God doesn't see me as less. I still struggle with pride, purity, and community, and I know that God wants a relationship with me and that He accepts me where I am with open arms. Spending time in the Word and in prayer helps me keep my mind on Jesus and where I'm going with my life. No matter what situation comes up, I know that God has my best interest in mind and that I have nothing to worry about. Recently, I've been resonating with 1 Peter 5:7, cast all your anxiety on Him because He cares for you. We have nothing to worry about, God is in control, and He cares for us. Thanks for listening.
Hey there, you guys. Thanks for being with us tonight. My name is Courtney.Horrmann, and I serve on staff with Cru. You met my friend Ryan last week. He and I help give leadership to the movement of Cru here in central Wisconsin. And if you don't know this about Ryan, he is a super fun guy and a big fisherman. So if you like to fish, you should hit him up. But if you're a first timer and coming this week, if you didn't make it last week, thanks for being here. Whether you're watching from your bedroom back home because you were all virtual this year and you didn't come back to Point, or you're somewhere in the Laird room or on campus and hanging out with some brand new friends that you just met, just thanks for being here. This isn't certainly how I wanted our first meeting to be, but here we are. And I'm just grateful that we can actually gather in some type of way, because we need people. We need relationships with each other, because doing life alone totally sucks. We need safe spaces for us to connect and ask questions. And that's really the heart of us as a student organization on campus, that we are a community of God seekers that would just encourage one another to ask questions about God, ask questions about ourselves, and with the truths of who God is and who He says that we are, we get to learn together what it is to actually live out and walk out our faith to the world around us. I also want to say we're all in process with this, and I get that even though I can't see you and you can all see me right now, I get that there is even a spectrum of where you're at in your process with God and your relationship with God. Some of you may not even have a relationship with Him yet, and I want to acknowledge that and just say, hey, thanks for checking us out. But I also want to say that if you are somebody that might be thinking, because this was me when I was in college, that maybe you need to have this whole God thing figured out and you need to have like your whole life figured out and in some type of order before you can even step foot in a church or to pray to God or in a Bible study or to Cru. I just want to say that if you go on thinking and living your life that once you have it all together, then that will happen, I think ultimately you'll end up living your life completely absent from God. So just start the process. I think we all need that. We need God to help us in our process. And we need people who already know God and are in a relationship with Him to help us in our process and be a safe person for us to ask questions to. So I just wanted to say that and just invite you into that. And if you are somebody who already has a relationship with God, be that safe person to somebody around you. Here's what I want to invite all of us to do right now, is I want to invite all of us to say, hey, sometimes I need some help. We all need help. We all need to acknowledge that we're people in need of something bigger than ourselves to help us navigate this thing called life. Because we encounter a lot of things that are hard. It's just true. We've encountered, even in 2020 alone, a lot of trauma, a lot of hard things in relationships. We are anxious all the time. Goodness gracious, we are anxious. And we are constantly thinking about what people might be thinking of us or how this is going to work out, how this, may possibly happen, or just trying to control our situations. We experience disappointment in plans that we make and things that we hope for that don't come to fruition. And we're tired and we're overwhelmed. And I just want to say that God invites us to live a different way. He invites us to live a different way because He invites us to be in a relationship with Himself. And when we do, life doesn't necessarily get easier, but I will say that my life with God, it has meaningful purpose, it has eternal hope, I experience joy, and I definitely experience more peace because I have a relationship with Him. And life is just too short and too precious to spend fearing the wrong things in the wrong ways. So I propose that we learn a holy fear of the God that we get to serve. So for the next few weeks, Ryan kicked us off last week, but we're going to be talking about God's character. Who is He? What's He like? How am I different from Him? Why is it a good thing that He's so different from me? Why does all that matter? Ryan mentioned something last week that A.W. Tozer said, that what we think about God is the most important thing about us. What we think about God is the most important thing about us. And a lot of why we say that, why Tozer said that, why Ryan and I would say that, is because what we think about him dictates how we live. Because here's this progression. Like, what I think about something dictates how I feel about something, and how I'm feeling influences how I act, and how I act then impacts my relationships with others, and certainly impacts my relationship with God. So what we're thinking about him, our knowledge of who he is, there's such a ripple effect to that. So that's why we're talking about his character, because I think a lot of times we just have misconstrued understanding of actually the truth of who he is. It's incredibly important that we think rightly about him. Something that to also know about me, I think is helpful context, is that I didn't necessarily grow up in the church. And much of how I now live my life came to fruition because of the conclusions I made about God when I was in college. And those conclusions led me to live my life in relationship with him and call God Father and call him Lord. So if you're like me at all and still trying to come to some conclusions, I really hope these next few weeks will specifically be helpful for you. So just to give you a roadmap for the next 15 minutes, there are two things that we're specifically going to talk about tonight. One is that God alone is self-sufficient. God alone is self-sufficient. So we're looking at the self-sufficiency and provision of God himself. And the second thing that we're going to talk about is that God didn't make me and he didn't make you to be self-sufficient. He made us to depend on him to provide for every single one of those needs. Okay? So God alone is self-sufficient, and God didn't make us to be self-sufficient. We actually are deeply insufficient, and we need him. So, okay, have you guys heard, I know you can't answer me, but answer each other just to humor me. Have you guys heard of the Energizer Bunny? Back in 1989, when I'm quite certain that none of you were born, this pink bunny with blue flip-flops and shades marched across TV screens and billboards with the tagline, "It just keeps going and going and going," and he like pounds the drum. This was to indicate the seemingly endless supply of life that we could expect from an Energizer battery. No need for a recharge or a replacement. That little pink bunny was a self-sustaining rabbit. The campaign was so successful that now, more than 30 years later, the term Energizer Bunny has totally entered our cultural vernacular as a term to describe anyone or anything with an inherent limitless energy. And when someone uses that term to describe us, what I have noticed is that sometimes many of us can wear that as a badge of honor. Or at least we used to. I think it's shifting here a little bit because of COVID-19 and what COVID-19 has done to our culture, among many other things, is that has shown us how unsustainable the pace in which we were living our lives actually is. Once we were all forced and are currently still forced to slow down and acknowledge the realities of the traumas going on around us, we then realize that we just can't do it all. We can't handle it all. We can't process it all. Life is just too overwhelming. And I think we as a culture, we collectively realized our limits. And I think even some of us saw for the first time our own pride in thinking that we never had any need to begin with. We humans cannot keep going and going and going. Only God can do that. Only God is self-sufficient. He is a God of no needs. He is limitless. He is, in fact, a self-contained source of perpetual and perfect sustenance. In Acts 17:24-25, it says, "The God who made the world and everything in it," so he's creator, "being Lord of heaven and earth, does not live in temples made by man, nor is he served by human hands as though he needed anything, since he himself gives to all mankind life and breath and everything." Because he created everything, nothing he has created could possibly be needful to him for his existence. Okay? Because he created everything, he created it all. Nothing he has created could possibly be needful to his existence because he existed before it. Our God is self-sufficient, needed by all, needful of nothing, unlimited in his provision. In my little finite brain, that's even really hard to fully grasp, but just keep going there with me. Ryan mentioned Tozer last week, but A.W. Tozer, he said in his book, Knowledge of the Holy, which, by the way, if you haven't read Knowledge of the Holy and you want to, you're intrigued by it, it's a tiny little book, email me. I'll get you a copy. I promise I'll get you a copy. Totally free, on me. But this is what Tozer said. To admit the existence of a need in God is to admit incompleteness in the divine being. To admit the existence of a need in God is to admit incompleteness in the divine being. That is certainly not true of us. We tend to think that we are an exception and that God in some way needs us. This couldn't be further from the truth. Tozer went on to say, he says, so lofty is our opinion of ourselves that we find it quite easy, not to say enjoyable, to believe that we are necessary to God. But the truth is that God is not greater for our being. We don't make him greater. He's already great in his own self. Nor would he be less if we did not exist. That we do exist is altogether of God's free determination. God created us gladly and he loves us infinitely, but he does not need us. Now, this is actually the best news we could hear, because if God needed us in any way, we would almost certainly, maybe not immediately, but eventually we would let him down. Even the most consistent among us drops the ball more often than we'd like to admit. I praise God that his plans do not rely on my faithfulness, his joy does not hinge on my good behavior, and his glory doesn't depend on my performance. Goodness, that is really freeing, and that is true for you too. I stumble along my life chasing my own agendas and making plans. I'm assuming you do as well. I love my Google Calendar, and I love my phone, and I love multitasking to the max. And I occasionally, more often as I am continuing to grow in my walk with the Lord, I bring the Lord into my process, but not always. And he is unharmed by my inconsistency. He is pleased to be glorified either through me or in spite of me, but he doesn't need me in the least. But don't let that lack of need, this is where I think I got confused, but don't let the lack of need that God has for us, don't let that confuse you. I think because of the culture we live in, we think we are only loved based off of what we do, what we give, what we're like, what we can provide. And that confuses us into thinking that God is the same, and he's absolutely not. Nor is it even true that your worth comes from these things. In general, it doesn't. Your worth was clearly demonstrated and on display the day God formed you in your mother's womb. You have worth because God made you, and he said so. He deeply desires to be in relationship with each of us. He loves me and he loves you deeply and eternally for no other reason other than, as Paul wrote in Ephesians 1, according to the good pleasure of his will. He loves us and desires to be in relationship with us simply because he wants to. Not because he needs to, or because he needs something from us, or that he wants us to give him something, or he has this long list of conditions that we have to get in order to receive his love. No, he loves us already because he chose to and he wants to. I think this is how I think about it if you're a logical thinker like me. Like, what can a creation give back to its creator other than the mere joy of its existence? If God needed anything at all outside himself, he would be capable of being controlled by that need. A need is a limit. We already talked about this. And as we've already know, God has no limits. And because he needs nothing outside himself, he cannot be controlled or coerced or blackmailed or manipulated by another who possesses something that he lacks. And that is really, really good news for us, because that leads us to point 2. It's a good thing we aren't like him here, and here's why. Because we are remarkably needy. Yet we're eager, at least I am, to conceal that we're needy at all. I'm assuming most, if not all of you watching this right now, are Americans. And our culture, American culture, specifically places a premium on independence. We love autonomy, and we view dependence as a sign of failure, a flaw of some kind, a lack of proper planning in our life. Christians, even, I will say, in particular, can sometimes interpret physical or financial or spiritual needs as a sign that God has removed blessing from us because of some failure on our part. But why do we take this view? This isn't the correct view. It's almost as though we can't separate the presence of a need that is existing from the presence of maybe our own sin. And sin is really just what the Bible describes as mess-ups that we do. So our mess-ups sometimes we think are the reasons we have need. Our mess-ups are the reasons we have need, and that's just not true. If you look at the first 3 chapters of the Bible, the creation story in the book of Genesis, we see immediately that the answer to that question is like, are our mess-ups the reasons we have need? And the answer would be absolutely not. Before the fall, before Eve was tempted and deceived, Adam and Eve were created to need. Even before the fateful plucking of the apple, they depended on God for breath in their lungs, for food in their bellies, for water, for land, for light, and he gave it to them all. They had needs for both physical and physical before sin even slithered into the picture. God created them needy, that in their need they might turn to him, the source, and he is a self-sufficient provider of all of those needs. All that they would need to do is acknowledge him and worship him, but instead they chose autonomy. And we've been doing it, all of us have been doing it ever since. Like them, we see human need as a flaw, and we see human self-sufficiency as a strength. With our lives full of anxiety and pain, we put a smile on our face and fake our way through our days and deny our need for authenticity. We take out another credit card or a loan, denying our need for financial stability. We ignore symptoms of illness, and we deny our need for a doctor. We work late into the night, denying our need for rest. We starve ourselves to a size 2, denying our need for food. I'm fine, I'm better than fine, and I certainly don't need any help. These are the things that we say. And we turn from God worship that should have resulted from seeing our needs. We see a need and we're like, oh my gosh, God meets them. So we turn away from that to instead self-worship of believing, or at least convincing ourselves in some way, that we, like God, are self-sufficient. God, in his infinite wisdom, created us to need him, and he also created us to need each other. Genesis 2 reminds us that it was not good for the man to be alone. Rather, it was good for him to be in relationship. The New Testament, the latter half of the Bible about Jesus' life and ministry and the life and ministry of the early church, expands this idea to include the community of Christian believers, comparing us to one body whose parts depend on each other and for whom self-sufficiency is both illogical and incredibly unthinkable. 1 Corinthians 12:21 says, this, Paul wrote this letter too, he said, the eye can't say to the hand, I have no need of you, nor again the head to the feet, I have no need of you. This is why we talk about at Cru, like why community and each other is so important, because we need one another to help one another. We were created to need both God and others. We deny this to our great destruction all the time. We are not needy because we sin or because there is something wrong with us. We are needy by divine design. Certainly, we can need in sinful ways, and we habitually confuse needs with wants, but we were not created to be self-sufficient. If you're like me, this reality of you being needy and in turn makes you feel vulnerable, and it can make you feel maybe a little uneasy. Because our human needs are real, and we do not know in what way or at what time they're actually going to be met, I think it's important for us to focus on this one thing. Truly, the greatest need any of us have ever had was fulfilled in the person of Jesus Christ. We need to be in relationship with God, but because we as humans chose autonomy in our own way, and so often continue to do so, there's a gap between us and God that existed. Eve and Adam chose it back in Genesis 3, and we've been living that way ever since. We need a bridge builder to create a way for that relationship to be restored. So here's what happened. The Gospels, the first 4 books of the New Testament, tell the stories of Jesus, our God who came to earth as a man, meeting physical needs in miraculous ways. He satisfied the physical hunger of 5,000. He restored the sick to health and the disabled to wholeness. He smoothed dangerous seas to safe waters, and he even brought the dead back to life. This same Jesus, who as God miraculously met the needs of so many, knew firsthand in his humanity what it meant to need. Human Jesus experienced the full range of human need. He needed food, he needed water, he needed air and shelter and clothing. He needed rest, he needed community and comfort of his friends and his disciples. Even God in the flesh was not a human version of the Energizer Bunny. It is true that God cannot be tempted, yet Jesus, in his humanity, was tempted in every way as we are, and he did not sin. The truth is that the God-man, Jesus, who walked among us, was a demonstration not of unveiled deity, but of perfect humanity. He didn't have mess-ups. So he was the perfect sacrifice so that justice could be served. For the wages of sin is death, Romans 3:23 says. Someone has to pay for the sins that get racked up. And God, through his son Jesus, provided a perfect sacrifice and way for it to not be us to have to pay for it. In Jesus' greatest hour of physical need, he met our greatest spiritual need by dying on the cross in our place. Maybe you've heard this before. Jesus died on the cross for your sins. Why? To be the bridge, to make a way for us, to be the bridge to God. God, in his mercy to us, made a way for us sinful, broken people who choose our own way time and time and time again to be in a relationship with him. Why? Because he wanted to, because he loves you. For me, living for this loving, self-sufficient, mysterious God and his plan for me in my own life have helped me see a profound truth. That I'm deeply broken and in need of someone to help me. And through that, I see that I'm deeply loved because Jesus was the one who did the helping. Our greatest need has been dealt with once and for all. Guys, God never created us to live our lives by just doing better and increasing our independence and doing life on our own and earning our way to him. But instead, the process we are all in that I was talking about earlier, it all starts with this: saying yes to God as your Lord, as your perfect, all-sufficient provider, and beginning a relationship with him. If you're wondering how to do that, let me invite you to ask your discussion group leader that you're in a room with. You can find any of the staff's phone numbers or emails on our UWSPCru.org website. Email me, email Ryan, call us, we'll grab coffee, we'll hang out, and we'll do our best to answer your questions. It's all a process. But the process is getting to know God all starts with a yes. So, thanks for being here, you guys.
Hey guys, hope you guys loved it. We're about to transition into our next portion, but first, a quick reminder about Mug and Muffin happening this Saturday the 12th. It might be kind of cold outside, and we're gonna be outdoors, so make sure you dress for the weather or maybe bring a blanket. Either way, it's on to discussions. So, discussion leaders, pass out your door prize cards now. For our friends viewing online, please click your Zoom link and your discussion leader will have your door prize card there.
See you guys next Thursday.
See ya!